If that feels familiar, you're not alone. By the time most people reach their 60s, they've done what they were told. They've followed the advice, gone through the screenings, trusted the process, and yet bloating lingers. Digestion feels unpredictable. Energy dips after meals, and something just feels off. What makes it harder is this quiet assumption many people carry. If I just keep testing, eventually I'll find the answer. That belief feels logical, responsible even. But in many cases, it's exactly what keeps people stuck, because not all tests clarify what's happening inside your body. Some add noise, some lead to unnecessary treatments, and a few, surprisingly, can actually move you further away from feeling better. There's a difference between useful information and misleading data. Think of it like your car's dashboard. If one warning light turns on, that's helpful. But imagine if 5 different lights started blinking randomly, each suggesting a different problem, none clearly connected. You'd feel confused, maybe even panic, and you might start fixing things that were never broken. That's what happens with certain intestinal tests after 60. The body changes, the gut environment shifts, and the same tests that once provided clarity can now create distortion. A 2021 review published in Gut Microbes examined how gut diagnostics perform across age groups. What stood out wasn't just variability, it was inconsistency. The same person could take the same test weeks apart and receive completely different interpretations. That's not guidance. That's guesswork dressed as precision. By the end of this, importantly, what to focus on instead if you actually want to feel better, not just collect more data. Because the goal isn't more testing, it's better outcomes. We're going to walk through this step by step. First, there's a popular gut test that promises to map your microbiome in detail, but often leaves people chasing numbers that don't translate into real improvement. Then we'll look at a breath test that seems simple on the surface, yet frequently mislabels normal digestive patterns as a problem. There's also a stool test that sounds comprehensive, but in older adults can produce results that are more confusing than helpful. After that, we'll explore a test many people assume is harmless, yet can lead to treatments your body doesn't actually need. And finally, we'll get to the one category of testing that feels the most advanced, and yet, for many over 60, measures the wrong thing entirely. Each one tells a story, but not always the right story. And once you see how these pieces fit together, you may start looking at your past test results very differently. Let's start with something that's become incredibly popular: full microbiome mapping. These are the tests that analyze your gut bacteria in detail. Pages of results, percentages, lists of organisms you've never heard of. It feels advanced, personalized, almost futuristic. The problem is how those results are interpreted. Your gut microbiome isn't a fixed system. It's constantly changing, based on what you eat, how you sleep, your stress levels, even how active you are. In your 30s or 40s, your microbiome tends to be more stable, but after 60, variability increases. That means a snapshot test can capture a moment, not a pattern. Inside your digestive tract, trillions of bacteria are interacting in real time. Some rise, others fall. It's less like a photograph and more like a live concert where instruments are constantly adjusting their volume. A paper published in Nature Aging followed adults over 65 and found significant day-to-day fluctuations in microbial composition, even when diet remained consistent. So when a test tells you one strain is low or another is high, it's often interpreting a moving target as if it were fixed. That leads to something subtle but important: overcorrection. People start taking specific probiotics, eliminating foods, or following strict protocols, all based on a single reading that may not reflect their baseline. For someone over 60, that can disrupt balance more than it restores it. A more grounded approach: focus on patterns your body actually shows you, how you feel after meals, how regular your digestion is, whether your energy is stable. Those signals matter more than isolated bacterial percentages. Before we move on, there's something else you need to see, because one of the most commonly used gut tests might be labeling a normal digestive process as a disorder. We'll unpack that next. Now consider breath tests, especially those used to detect something called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, often shortened to SIBO. These tests measure gases like hydrogen and methane after you drink a sugar solution. Sounds straightforward, But here's where things get complicated. As we age, the speed of digestion often slows down. Food moves through the small intestine more gradually. That's not necessarily a disease, it's a natural shift. But slower movement means bacteria have more time to ferment sugars, which means higher gas readings. So what does the test show? Elevated gases. And what does that sometimes get labeled as? SIBO. Even when it may simply something is overgrown, but their symptoms are mild or inconsistent. A clinical review in the American Journal of Gastroenterology pointed out that breath test results can be heavily influenced by transit time, something that naturally changes with age. So instead of diagnosing a condition, the test may be capturing a normal variation. Here's a simple daily shift that can make a real difference. Instead of grazing throughout the day, try spacing meals about 4 to 5 hours apart. That gives your digestive system time to complete a process called the migrating motor complex, a kind of internal cleanup wave that helps regulate bacterial balance. It's simple, no supplements, no complicated protocols, and it aligns with how your body is designed to function. Left unaddressed, though, misinterpreting these results can lead to repeated antibiotic treatments, something that can gradually weaken gut resilience over time. There's a belief many people carry, often without realizing it. If a test is more detailed, it must be more accurate. That's especially true with comprehensive stool tests. Pages of markers, enzyme levels, inflammatory indicators, microbial breakdowns. It feels like getting a full blueprint of your gut. But here's where that belief breaks down. More data doesn't always mean better understanding. Because your digestive system isn't static. It responds to what you ate yesterday, how well you slept, even how stressed you felt last week. A single stool sample captures a moment influenced by all of those variables. Now here's the reality. Many of these markers don't have well-established reference ranges for older adults. So results get interpreted against standards developed from younger populations. That's like comparing a 70-year-old marathon walker to a 25-year-old sprinter and calling the difference a problem. It's not a fair comparison. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine checking the tide at the beach once, just once, and trying to predict the ocean's behavior for the entire month. You might catch it at high tide and assume the water is always that high, or at low tide and assume the opposite. But the ocean operates on cycles. So does your gut. A large population analysis published in Clinical Gastroenterology and Hepatology showed wide variability in stool markers, even among healthy older adults, with no clear link to symptoms. And yet, those variations often trigger interventions. Here's something you can do starting tomorrow. Instead of focusing on test numbers, track one simple thing for a week. How you feel 90 minutes after eating. Energy, bloating, clarity. That window tells you more about how your gut is functioning than most isolated lab markers. At 65 and beyond, your body's feedback systems are still incredibly intelligent, but they require interpretation, not over-testing. There was a time when food sensitivity testing seemed like a breakthrough. Send in a sample, get a list, eliminate foods, feel better. That was the promise. Before we understood immune complexity in greater depth, these tests were often used to guide elimination diets, especially when digestive symptoms were vague. Now the picture looks different. Many of these tests measure IgG antibodies, and IgG doesn't necessarily signal a problem. It often reflects exposure. In other words, the foods you eat most frequently are the ones most likely to show up on your sensitivity list. So people end up removing foods their body is actually accustomed to handling. That can lead to overly restrictive diets, especially challenging after 60, when maintaining nutrient diversity becomes more important. Zoom in for a moment. Your immune system interacts with food constantly. It's not just reacting, it's learning, adapting, tolerating. Removing too many foods at once can disrupt that balance. Then zoom back out. What does that mean for daily life? Instead of broad elimination based on a test, a more effective approach is targeted observation. Here's one practical strategy. Pick one meal you eat regularly. Keep it consistent for 3 days. Then change one ingredient and observe the difference. It's controlled, personalized, and grounded in real feedback, not generalized panels. This shift from broad restriction to precise awareness often leads to better outcomes with less stress. Let me ask you something. Have you ever looked at a test result, seen a number slightly outside the normal range, and immediately assumed something was wrong? That reaction is incredibly common, especially with advanced inflammatory gut panels. These tests measure markers like calprotectin or other indicators of inflammation. They can be useful in certain clinical situations. But here's where things get tricky. Low-level inflammation can fluctuate, especially with age. A mild elevation doesn't always point to disease. It can reflect temporary changes, a recent infection, a shift in diet, even increased physical stress. But when those numbers are interpreted without context, they can lead to unnecessary worry, and sometimes unnecessary treatment. Your gut lining is constantly renewing itself. Cells turn over. Signals change. It's a dynamic system, so a single elevated marker doesn't tell the full story. It's like checking your body temperature once and assuming you have a chronic condition. The number matters, but context matters more. The real question isn't just, is this elevated? It's, what does this mean in the context of how I feel? And that leads us to the most important part of this entire conversation. Because once you step back from these tests, one question remains. If not these, then what actually helps? Everything we've covered leads right into that answer. Now we shift from testing to doing, because real progress doesn't come from more reports. It comes from consistent, grounded habits. The first shift most people can make, without changing anything dramatic, is timing. Give your digestive system defined windows. 3 meals, no constant snacking, about 4 or 5 hours between each. That rhythm supports the natural cleanup cycles in your gut, the same ones we talked about earlier with the migrating motor complex. The second adjustment is texture. As we age, digestion often benefits from slightly simpler forms, cooked vegetables instead of raw, soups instead of dense, dry meals. This reduces the mechanical load on your digestive system, making absorption more efficient. The third step involves movement, but not intensity. A 10-15-minute walk after meals can significantly improve how your body processes food. It's not about burning calories, it's about guiding glucose and supporting motility. And finally, hydration, but with intention. Instead of drinking large amounts during meals, spread water intake between meals. This helps maintain optimal digestive enzyme function. None of these require a lab test, but together they influence the very systems those tests attempt to measure. And here's something to keep in mind. There's one small habit in this list that tends to create the biggest shift for people over 60, but almost no one prioritizes it at first. Think about which one that might be as we wrap up. At the beginning, changed, not overnight, but steadily. Here's what matters most. Your gut is not a static system waiting to be decoded by a single test. It's a living, responsive environment, shaped daily by what you eat, how you move, how you rest. Tests can provide clues, but they are not the full picture. Especially after 60, the goal shifts from chasing data to understanding patterns, from reacting to numbers to observing responses, from complexity to clarity. If something in this conversation changed how you think about your health, even slightly, consider sharing it with someone who's been searching for answers too. Because sometimes the most helpful step isn't doing more, it's doing less, but doing it better. And there's one more piece to this puzzle, something that happens inside your body every single morning before your first bite of food that quietly sets the tone for your entire day.